My name is Aurelia, and in the cutthroat world of high-stakes corporate management, I've spent the last 17 years building a reputation that precedes me. They call me the turnaround queen. From Manhattan boardrooms to Chicago's industrial hubs, my track record was flawless. I walked into dying companies, gutted the inefficiency, and rebuilt them into profit-generating machines. My integrity was my currency, and my experience was my shield. But I was about to learn that even the strongest shield can be shattered when the enemy is hiding behind a smile and a seven-figure signing bonus. It was a Tuesday in late autumn, the kind of New York morning where the wind whips through the skyscrapers like a warning. I stood in my office, staring at two contracts on my mahogany desk. Two paths. Two destinies. On the left was Vertex Global. They were the old guard, a prestigious, rock-solid firm with a legacy of ethical practices and legal transparency. They offered me stability and a respectable seat at the table. On the right was Nexus Corp. Nexus was the disruptor. A meteoric, fast-growing construction and development giant that was aggressive, flashy, and hungry. Their CEO, a charismatic man named Marcus, hadn't just offered me a job, he had offered me a kingdom. The compensation package was staggering, a base salary in high-end dollars, stock options that could retire a small city, and a lifestyle that felt more like royalty than corporate management. After 17 years of grinding for the good guys, a voice in my head whispered, "You've earned this. It's time to get paid." I ignored the faint chill in my spine, picked up the pen, and signed with Nexus Corporation. It was the most expensive mistake of my life. The first few weeks at the Nexus headquarters, a glass fortress overlooking the skyline, were a whirlwind of luxury. I was treated like a savior. Marcus gave me a corner office and immediate oversight of their newest, multi-billion-dollar construction wing. My task was simple: optimize the supply chain and maximize the margins on 3 massive skyscraper projects currently under development. On paper, Nexus was a miracle. Their growth charts looked like a vertical line to heaven. But as I began to dig into the operational workflows, I felt the first vibration of a hidden earthquake. I remember sitting in a high-level briefing where the chief financial officer presented the procurement reports for the new structural steel and high-grade concrete. The numbers were breathtakingly high. According to the invoices, we were buying the absolute premium tier of materials, the best money could buy. However, when I conducted my first unannounced site visit to the downtown project, something didn't click. The texture of the concrete, the markings on the steel beams, it didn't look like the grade A material I had authorized on the purchase orders. It looked average. Or worse, substandard. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was a logistical error or a vendor swap. But when I asked for the original shipping manifests, the atmosphere in the office shifted. The warmth from the executive team cooled by 10 degrees. Marcus, usually so transparent, started pulling me into private meetings, telling me to focus on the big picture and leave the granular details to the site managers. I was being sidelined under the guise of being protected from the stress. By the end of my first month, the turnaround queen realized she hadn't been hired to fix the company. I had been hired as a facade. My 17 years of clean, impeccable reputation were being used as a cloak to hide something rotting in the foundation of Nexus Corporation. The high-gloss lifestyle they gave me wasn't a reward, it was a bribe to keep my eyes shut. But Marcus forgot one thing about me: I don't just look at the penthouse, I check the basement. And the basement of Nexus Corp was starting to smell like a crime scene. The silence in the executive wing of Nexus Corp was different from any silence I had experienced in my career. It wasn't the silence of productivity, it was the silence of a secret. Every time I walked past the glass-walled offices, conversations would stall, and eyes would drop to glowing laptop screens. Marcus, the man who had promised me a kingdom, was now a ghost, always in a meeting or traveling for investors. I was the executive vice president, yet I felt like a prisoner in a gold-plated cage. I decided to stop asking for permission and started looking for the truth. My 17 years in the industry taught me that while people can lie, the paper trail always tells a story, if you know how to read between the lines. I arrived at the office at 5 a.m., long before the security team did their full rounds or the janitorial staff started their buzz. I had a master key to the central archive room, a privilege of my high-ranking title that Marcus had likely forgotten to restrict. I focused on the North Star project, a 60-story luxury residential tower that was the crown jewel of Nexus's current portfolio. On the digital dashboard, the project was under budget and ahead of schedule. But when I pulled the physical procurement files, the raw, unedited invoices from the subcontractors, the math started to fall apart. According to the internal ledgers, Nexus was paying $450 per cubic yard for ultra-high-performance concrete. This was the top-tier stuff required for a building of that height to withstand high winds and seismic activity. However, buried in a secondary folder of delivery receipts, I found a series of handwritten slips from a local supplier I had never heard of, Blue Rock Logistics. These slips showed a delivery price of only $110 per cubic yard. My heart hammered against my ribs. In the world of construction, that price difference isn't a saving, it's a death sentence. It meant they were charging the investors for premium, life-saving materials but actually pouring the cheapest, weakest sludge into the building's skeleton. Millions of dollars were being siphoned off into offshore accounts, while thousands of future residents were being put at risk. This wasn't just corporate greed, it was cold-blooded endangerment. I spent the next 3 hours photographing every document with my phone, my hands trembling. As the sun began to peek over the Manhattan skyline, I realized why Marcus wanted me so badly. He didn't need my management skills. He needed my integrity. If the federal regulators ever came knocking, he could point to me, Aurelia, the woman with the spotless 17-year record, and say, "How could there be fraud? Look who we hired to run the show." I was his human shield. I was the clean face of a dirty operation. Suddenly, the heavy door to the archive room creaked open. I barely had time to slide my phone into my blazer pocket before the CFO, David, stepped in. He wasn't wearing his usual arrogant smile. He looked tired, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. "Aurelia," he said, his voice flat. "You're in early. Marcus was asking about your progress on the quarterly reports." "Just doing some deep dive research, David," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I like to understand the foundation before I build the narrative." He walked toward the desk where I had been working, his eyes lingering on the Blue Rock Logistics folder. The air in the room turned ice cold. He knew. And now, he knew that I knew. "Don't dig too deep, Aurelia," he whispered, stepping uncomfortably close. "In this city, the foundations are deeper and darker than you can imagine. You're making more money than you've ever seen. Just enjoy the view from the top and let the engineers worry about the dirt." He turned and walked out, leaving the threat hanging in the air like thick smoke. I stood there, clutching my phone, the only weapon I had. I realized then that I couldn't just quit. If I resigned, they would destroy the evidence, blame the missing funds on a clerical error, and keep building their death trap. I looked at the files one last time. I had spent 17 years building my name. I wasn't going to let Marcus and his gang of thieves turn it into a tombstone. I needed a plan. I needed a lawyer I could trust. And more than anything, I needed to play the role of the clueless executive for just a little while longer. Living a lie is exhausting. For the next 2 weeks, I became an actress deserving of an Oscar. Every morning, I put on my designer suits, pinned on my turnaround queen persona, and walked into Nexus Corp with a smile that felt like a porcelain mask. I sat in board meetings, nodded at Marcus's jokes, and even helped draft the very reports I knew were built on lies. But beneath the surface, I was a ghost in their machine. To take down a giant like Nexus, a few photos of invoices wouldn't be enough. Marcus had layers of high-priced lawyers and fixers who could make paperwork disappear. I needed the digital trail, the wire transfers and the private communications that linked the fake invoices to the CEO's personal offshore accounts. I began staying late, claiming the North Star project needed my undivided attention. The security guards got used to seeing me. I started befriending the IT department, bringing them expensive coffee and talking about my struggles with the new encrypted server. Slowly, I gathered the pieces of the puzzle: login credentials, server locations, and the names of the shell companies Marcus used to funnel the money. One rainy Tuesday night, the office was deserted. The only sound was the hum of the HVAC system and the distant sirens of the city. I sat at my desk, my heart thumping so hard I could feel it in my throat. I had managed to bypass the secondary firewall using a password I'd overseen during a screen share meeting with David, the CFO. As the progress bar on my encrypted thumb drive crawled toward 100%, I opened a hidden directory labeled Project Phoenix. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just construction fraud. Nexus was a massive laundering front. They were taking investment money from overseas entities with ties to organized crime, and washing it through these construction projects. The $450 per yard concrete wasn't just a way to steal, it was a way to move massive amounts of dirty cash into the legitimate U.S. banking system. I was staring at a digital ledger when my office door opened. I didn't even have time to minimize the window. It was Marcus. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, and his tie was loosened. He looked less like a CEO and more like a predator. He walked in slowly, leaning against my desk, his eyes fixed on my computer screen. "Working late again, Aurelia?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous purr. "You're the most dedicated employee I've ever had. Or, the most curious." I felt the sweat prickle at the back of my neck. I forced myself to look him directly in the eyes. 17 years of high-stakes negotiations had given me a poker face made of steel. "The North Star margins were bothering me, Marcus," I said, my voice steady. "I found some discrepancies in the Phoenix directory. I was just about to send you an email. I think one of our subcontractors, Blue Rock Logistics, is overcharging us." I was trying to trace the wire to see if we could claw back the funds. I was gambling my life on a lie. If he knew I was onto the laundering, I wouldn't make it to the elevator. Marcus stared at me for what felt like an eternity. He then let out a short, dry laugh. "Blue Rock. Yeah. They're complicated. Listen, Aurelia. You're smart. Too smart. That's why I'm doubling your bonus this quarter. Consider it a hush-up fee for the stress. Stop looking at Phoenix. It's handled by a private team." He reached over and closed my laptop lid with one hand. "Go home. Get some sleep. You've got a big press conference tomorrow. We're announcing the final phase of North Star. I need you looking sharp." As he walked out, he patted the pocket of my blazer, the one where I usually kept my phone. He gave me a wink that sent a shiver of pure terror down my spine. He was letting me know that he was watching. The golden handcuffs were tightening. I waited until I heard his footsteps fade down the hall. I grabbed my thumb drive, my bag, and my coat. I didn't take the elevator, I took the stairs, 18 flights down, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't go to my penthouse. I drove straight to a small, dimly lit diner in Queens. Waiting in the back booth was Sarah, a former federal prosecutor I had known since my early days in the industry. She was the only person I could trust. I slid the thumb drive across the table. "Nexus Corp isn't just a company, Sarah," I whispered. "It's a ticking time bomb. And if we don't stop them, that tower is going to fall, and it's going to take my name, and thousands of lives, down with it." The morning of the press conference felt like a funeral procession. The venue was the 50th floor of the North Star project, a raw, skeletal space of exposed steel and glass that offered a panoramic, dizzying view of the city. Camera crews from every major financial network were setting up, their lights reflecting off the grade A steel that I now knew was nothing more than overpriced scrap. Marcus was in his element. He moved through the crowd of investors and journalists like a shark in silk, shaking hands and radiating the kind of confidence that only a man with a billion-dollar lie can maintain. I stood backstage, my stomach in knots. In my pocket was a small earpiece. Sarah, the prosecutor, was on the other end. We're verifying the Project Phoenix data now, Aurelia, Sarah's voice crackled in my ear. But we need more. The wire transfers you found link to shell companies, but we need the final authorization signature. It's the digital key Marcus uses to move the money out of the US. Without it, he can claim he was just a victim of a rogue CFO. And where is this key? I whispered, turning my back to a passing intern. It's on his personal hardware. A biometric encrypted tablet he carries in his briefcase, Sarah replied. If you can get us access for just 60 seconds while he's on stage, our tech team can remote mirror the drive. I looked at Marcus's briefcase, sitting unguarded in the green room behind the stage. It was a suicide mission. If I was caught, there would be no turnaround queen anymore, only a disgraced executive facing prison or worse. Aurelia. You're on in 5. Marcus shouted, waving me over. He put an arm around my shoulder, leaning in close. The smell of his expensive cologne was suffocating. Remember, focus on the innovation and the safety standards. Use that 17-year-old integrity of yours to sell the dream. If the investors see you're confident, the stock price hits the moon by noon. I walked onto the stage to a thunderous round of applause. The lights were blinding. I looked out at the sea of faces, people who had invested their life savings into this dream. I began my speech, my voice steady, my professional mask firmly in place. I spoke about structural integrity, about the future of the skyline, and about the uncompromising quality of Nexus Corporation. Every word felt like a shard of glass in my throat. Halfway through my presentation, I feigned a coughing fit. I signaled to the moderator, grabbed a bottle of water, and stepped back into the shadows of the green room for a moment of air. I had exactly 2 minutes. I lunged for the briefcase. It was locked with a fingerprint scanner, but I had prepared for this. During our dinner meeting the night before, I had subtly encouraged Marcus to use a specific crystal glass for his scotch. I pulled a small, adhesive lifting strip from my pocket, bearing his thumbprint, and pressed it against the scanner. Click. The tablet was inside. I plugged in the bridge device Sarah had given me. I'm in, I hissed into the earpiece. 10%, 20. Sarah counted down. Aurelia, Marcus is looking for you. He's finished his intro early. Get out of there. I could hear his footsteps approaching the heavy curtain. 60%, 80. The door handle turned. I yanked the bridge device out, shoved the tablet back, and snapped the briefcase shut just as Marcus stepped in. Aurelia? You okay? The crowd is waiting for the Q&A, he said, his eyes narrowing as he looked from me to his briefcase. Just a bit of vertigo, I said, leaning against the table, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The height, it's a lot to take in. He walked over, his hand hovering over the briefcase. He looked at me, then at the case, then back at me. A cold, knowing smile spread across his face. It is a long way down, isn't it? Make sure you don't lose your balance, Aurelia. We're so close to the finish line. I walked back onto that stage, but I wasn't the same woman. The data was transmitted. The trap was set. Now, the turnaround queen had to survive the next 24 hours before the FBI moved in. But as I looked at the CFO, David, standing by the exit with 2 large, unsmiling men in dark suits, I realized that Marcus didn't just suspect me. He was waiting for me to make my final move. The 24 hours following the press conference were a blur of calculated paranoia. I didn't go back to my apartment. I knew Marcus's security team would be waiting there. Instead, I checked into a nondescript motel near JFK Airport under a false name, my eyes glued to the burner phone Sarah had provided. The air was thick with tension. By 8 a.m. the next morning, the Project Phoenix files had been decrypted by the federal task force. The evidence was damning. It wasn't just a construction scam, it was a blueprint for a global financial crime. Sarah's voice on the phone was sharp and urgent. Aurelia, we have enough for the warrants. The FBI is moving in at 10 a.m. But there's a problem. Our field agents just spotted Marcus and David heading toward a private hangar at Teterboro. They're planning to flee before the hammer drops. I felt a surge of cold adrenaline. If they leave the country, the money and the evidence in that building go with them. They'll burn the servers remotely. You have to freeze the site now. We're on it, Sarah said. But Aurelia, you need to stay put. You're our star witness. If anything happens to you, the case falls apart. But I couldn't just sit in a motel room. 17 years of taking charge wouldn't let me hide. I knew exactly where the physical backup drive was hidden, a fail-safe Marcus kept in a floor safe inside the North Star's construction office. If he had triggered a remote wipe of the main servers, that physical drive was the only thing that would hold up in a court of law to prove the intentional use of substandard materials. I drove back to the North Star site. The skyscraper stood like a hollow giant against the gray sky. I used my executive pass one last time to enter the service elevator. The site was eerily quiet, the workers had been sent home early for a maintenance break, a clear sign that the exit strategy was in motion. I reached the 40th floor construction office. My hands were shaking as I knelt by the desk, peeling back the industrial carpeting to reveal the safe. I entered the code I had glimpsed weeks ago. Click. I grabbed the heavy, black drive. But as I turned to leave, the door slammed shut. Marcus stood there. He wasn't the charming CEO anymore. His eyes were bloodshot, and his face was twisted with a desperate rage. He held a small remote detonator in one hand and a heavy folder in the other. 17 years of experience, Aurelia, he spat, his voice trembling. You could have been the richest woman in this city. You could have been a legend. Instead, you chose to be a snitch. I chose to be an engineer, Marcus, I said, clutching the drive to my chest. I chose to make sure this building doesn't collapse on 5,000 people just so you can buy another yacht. This building isn't going to collapse, Marcus laughed, a hollow, terrifying sound. Because it's never going to be finished. I placed incendiary devices in the utility shafts. By the time the FBI gets here, this place will be a chimney. The evidence, the files, and the turnaround queen, all gone in a tragic construction accident. He stepped toward me, but at that moment, the distant sound of sirens began to wail. Not one or two, but a symphony of them, approaching from every direction. The horizon was filled with the flashing red and blue of federal vehicles. Marcus froze. His thumb hovered over the button. It's over, Marcus, I said, stepping forward, my heart hammering like a drum. Sarah has the digital keys. The offshore accounts are frozen. Even if you press that button, you're just adding mass murder to a list of charges that already includes life in prison. Drop the remote. For a second, the world stood still. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the moment he realized the Golden Queen had truly outplayed him. He lunged at me, but the office door was kicked open. FBI. Drop the device. A swarm of tactical agents flooded the room. Marcus was tackled to the ground, the remote skidding across the concrete floor. I sank to my knees, the heavy drive still in my arms, as the chaos of the arrest swirled around me. David, the CFO, was caught at the hangar. The site was secured. The Project Phoenix was dead. As they led Marcus out in handcuffs, he looked back at me, his face a mask of pure hatred. I didn't look away. I stood tall, the dust of the construction site coating my expensive suit. I had saved my reputation, but more importantly, I had saved the lives of the people who would have lived in his death trap. The aftermath of the raid was a media firestorm. The image of the turnaround queen, standing amidst the FBI agents, clutching the evidence that brought down a billion-dollar empire, was on the cover of every major financial newspaper from the Wall Street Journal to the Financial Times. But for me, the noise didn't matter. What mattered was the quiet that followed. Nexus Corp was sealed within 48 hours. Yellow crime scene tape draped across the glass entrance of the skyscraper like a scar. The courts moved with unprecedented speed. Because of the evidence I provided, the company's assets were frozen to compensate the defrauded investors. Marcus and David were denied bail, facing a laundry list of federal charges that ensured they would never see the inside of a boardroom again. I spent a week away from the city, sitting by the ocean, letting the salt air wash away the scent of corporate decay. My phone didn't stop ringing. Every headhunter in the country wanted a piece of the woman who had the guts to take down her own employer. I was offered millions to join tech giants and hedge funds. But I wasn't looking for the highest bidder anymore. My 17 years of experience had taught me a lesson that no MBA ever could: integrity isn't just a moral choice, it's the only foundation that holds. A month later, I walked into a familiar building. It wasn't a glass fortress, and there were no gold-plated elevators. It was the headquarters of Vertex Global. The CEO, a man who valued slow and steady over fast and fraudulent, met me in the lobby. He didn't offer me a kingdom or a fleet of private jets. He offered me a seat at a wooden table and a mission to build something that would last. "The salary won't be in the millions of dollars you saw at Nexus, Aurelia," he said, handing me a simple, honest contract. "But you'll sleep at night. And every brick we lay will be exactly what we say it is." I picked up the pen. This time, my hand didn't shake. "That's the only package I'm interested in," I replied. Joining Vertex felt like coming home. I took over their urban development wing, applying my turnaround skills to projects that focused on sustainable housing and community infrastructure. We didn't grow at a lightning pace, but we grew with transparency. I implemented a zero-graft policy, where every invoice was public and every material was tested by independent labs. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my new office, I looked across the skyline. In the distance, the North Star Tower sat dark and empty, a monument to greed. It would eventually be dismantled and rebuilt correctly, a process I was personally overseeing as a consultant for the city. I realized then that my 17 years hadn't been wasted. They were a preparation. I had seen the heights of success and the depths of corruption, and I had come out on the other side with my name intact. My name is Aurelia. I am an engineer, a leader, and a whistleblower. Paisa, money, is a tool, but your character is your legacy. In the end, the only thing you truly own is your word. And mine has never been stronger. The end.